ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the MMA Kings podcast. I'm your host, John Brown, alongside the one and only Nolan King. How you doing today, Nolan?
I'm doing pretty well. It's good to be back, finally recording after our little hiatus that we went on, but we're back. Now, formerly was the Kneebar MMA podcast. Now we're the MMA Kings Kneebar podcast, I guess we could call it, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be with you, hosting this UFC 202 preview edition. We got a big fight this weekend. We're actually going to hear from one of the fighters here a little bit later. But, man, let's get into the news. We had some big news. A lot of people knew a lot of these fights, but they were officially announced. UFC 204, Manchester, England. Bisping defending his belt against Dan Henderson in a fight that some people are not so happy about. Nolan, I know you weren't so sold on it when it was announced.
No, I mean, it's one of those things, like, it's announced, it's going to happen, and I'll enjoy it for what it is. I'll definitely be watching. It's definitely one that, it's very polarizing. A lot of people want Bisping to lose. A lot of people want Bisping to win. So it's interesting. It's kind of more of a Bellator-esque matchmaking, in my opinion, especially, I'm okay with these kind of fights occurring when there's kind of a slow time in the division where there's not a lot of contenders or the champion's been kind of dominant. But to have guys like Yoel and Jacare and Weidman and Rockhold all arguably could get the next shot, to have Henderson come in right now, it's kind of it doesn't make the most sense to me. I think it kind of clogs everything up. I don't know if you agree with me on that one, but that's just the way I feel.
Yeah, it's a fight that, like you said, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's more Bellator-esque in its matchmaking, but it's going to be fun for what it's worth. Also, on that fight in UFC 204, we have Vitor Belfort and Gegard Mousasi as the co-main event. Kind of crazy that Henderson and Belfort are still in the main and co-main event slots in 2016. I mean, I love both the guys are legends, don't get me wrong, but it's a little crazy if you think about it, man. They've been around forever, but I think both those fights are going to be interesting. Also announced on that card, Stefan Struve versus Ruslan Magomedov. I love this matchup. Struve's the guy that's been hot and cold. Magomedov's been has great striking. He's been on a really good tear. Been out for a while after his last victory, but I'm really looking forward to that fight. A couple other fights: OSP versus Jimmy Manuwa. Brad Pickett's going to be fighting against Yuri Alcantara. Davey Grant and Damian Stasiak was announced. Any of those that really catch your eye, Nolan?
I think that as far as matchmaking goes, they're all awesome. Belfort Mousasi was a fight for a long time that I've wanted to see. I guess they've both wanted this to happen since the Pride days. The one that you just listed that I like the most, probably OSP and Jimmy Manuwa. I think these guys are very similar, both in where they are at in their careers and their abilities. I'm just excited to see. Honestly, this whole card's pretty good, and I think it'll be fun for the fans in Manchester to have Michael Bisping headlining, and a bunch of other local fighters fighting on their first legitimate pay-per-view in quite some time.
Yeah, we'll see. I guess that's about 7 fights announced. There are probably another 6 or 7, more like 6 or 5 probably, announced in the coming weeks. So be tuned. We'll tell you about those. Any other news, Nolan?
And one other fight you forgot from this card is the most random fight, in my opinion, on this card. Leonardo Santos versus Adriano Martins. 2 Brazilians fighting in Manchester. I don't really know what the thought was behind that, but I like the fight, and I think it's a great fight for the English fans to watch, even though they don't have anybody from Europe in that bout. But then as far as off of this card, there's been a couple fights that stuck out, one of which, October 1st, Portland, Oregon, the main event, John Lineker versus John Dodson. I'm absolutely, stoked for this fight. I'm sure you probably feel the same.
Yeah, bombs away, man. I tell you, man. Keep on your toes. That one's gonna be over either. I mean, that could be a battle, could be a war, but someone's probably going to sleep in that one. I don't know if any 2 fighters under 155 pounds that hit as hard as these guys. I mean, every time they fight, it's usually a finish, So you definitely have to go look out. And I love that matchmaking, man. I think this fight's, I feel like we're kind of in the age where these guys, used to, they say you can't have a bantamweight headline. There's just not enough depth. There's not enough personalities. But people want to see this fight. I mean, this is a great main event in 2016. I think we're finally seeing these lighter weight classes catch on.
That's for sure. And, I'm glad we have some time in between then and now. Both, I'll keep getting more and more excited, but it also gives me some time to try to figure out who I think is going to win that fight. Because right now, if you ask me, I would flip-flop 10 times before I went to bed tonight. But two other fights or events that got fights announced for them. One, UFC Manila takes place on October 15th. They have announced a featherweight bout, and then they've also a couple of the fighters have come out and said that they've agreed to a bout. The main event, the official bout, Ricardo Lamas versus the returning BJ Penn, a fight that a lot of people are kind of surprised by. Penn was supposed to fight Dennis Seaver at UFC 199, then Cole Miller, and then now he ends up on this card in Manila against top 5 ranked featherweight Ricardo Lamas. Johnny, do you think this is a little bit of a mismatch?
I think so. I mean, BJ Penn's a legend. Don't get me wrong. Penn is a legend, and he'll go down as a legend. But, man, this is a tough fight to come back off being, out for quite some time. It's going to be over 2 years since his last fight. And in that fight, if you remember against Frankie Edgar, obviously it was 2 years ago, but, man, he looked really bad in that fight. I don't necessarily think this is a fight to come back. We saw Diego Sanchez drop down and fight Ricardo Lamas. It was a pretty, it was an entertaining fight, but Lamas dominated that one. I kind of feel the same thing. He's going to dominate this fight, and hopefully, maybe he'll prove us wrong. No, I'm not sure, but it's just not my favorite. I think it's kind of lazy matchmaking.
And I agree with that. I don't feel comfortable with BJ Penn stepping back in the cage at all. At least a matchup against Dennis Seaver or Cole Miller would have made me feel a little more comfortable. Even if he lost, I don't think it would have been what we saw from him the last time he was in the octagon, where he came in, fought a ranked guy at a weight class that he had never fought at before, and it was just kind of not only sad, but it was, he got beat up pretty bad, and it was kind of, I don't know, it was one of those things that kind of makes you feel uneasy as a fight fan. But, hey, this is MMA, anything can happen, so again, I'll be watching, and come October 15th. Also on that card, as I alluded to earlier, 2 heavyweights have taken to Twitter and Facebook to announce that they verbally agreed to fight. Derek the Black Beast Lewis will come back. Kind of, in a lot of people's opinion, a step back, fighting Marcin Tybura, who's coming off a thunderous head kick knockout of the year candidate against Victor Pesta a couple weeks ago. So that is going to be definitely a fight that I don't think will go the distance.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good heavyweight fight there in the Philippines. Anything else?
Yeah, though, the only other thing that, I thought we should touch on right now is that this morning, or this afternoon, Jeremy Botter from Flow Sports announced that Rashad Evans will be taking on Tim Kennedy in New York. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that one, Johnny. In my opinion, it's pretty good matchmaking.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people complain about it. As far as I saw it, Rashad Evans, his great career at light heavyweight was pretty much over. He fought pretty much everyone for the most part in that division, and he's kind of maybe on the downswing in that weight class. I still think he has a little bit left. He's not that old. I think the fight against Kennedy makes a lot of sense. Kennedy has been out for a while. He looks obviously always in tremendous shape. You see him post on Twitter all the time. So I think this should be an interesting fight, and I actually do like the match.
Yeah. I mean, I as far as matchmaking goes, it definitely is a good matchup. Maybe it doesn't do the most for me. Like, I'm not going to be thinking about this fight, until maybe fight week. But 2 big names, 2 guys that are at different points in their career, but it makes all the sense in the world to match them up. So that was really the last fight announcement as far as big fights go that we had this week.
Yeah, awesome, man. But talking about big fights this weekend, UFC 202, T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. We got a stacked card. I mean, there's no titles on the line, but as far as the fights go, this might be one of the best cards that doesn't feature a title. You know what I mean? There's just the main card's loaded, and there's some pretty good fights in the prelims as well. Let's just jump into it, man. I'll let you run down the fights, and we'll kind of talk our piece on them.
Yeah, this definitely has some potential to be fight of the year, or fight card of the year, especially after the UFC 200 card last month kind of was a little bit disappointing, to say the least. But yeah, let's just get into it. Starting off the Fight Pass prelims at 6:30, we have Alberto Uda, who is returning for his second UFC fight. He is 10-1, 0-1. Alberto Uda is 10-1. He is 0-1 in the UFC, coming off a loss to Jake Collier in a fight that he was initially winning up until the point that he got stopped. And then you also have a debuting fighter from Venetor in Italy, Marvin Vettori. He's 10-2, making his UFC debut. Johnny, any thoughts on this one?
I'm leaning Vettori, I guess that's how you say it. I think he's going to win the fight. I saw him fight in Venetor. He had a really good performance, and Uda's tough, though. I mean, this one's like a coin flip, I guess you could say. But I'm leaning the newcomer, Vittori. I think he's going to get it done. I'm thinking he might get a submission. I don't know. I know Uda's got a pretty good, well-rounded game, but it should be interesting to see this fight.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of tape for these upcoming fights. I mean, for my interest in obviously betting on them. In terms of something that made me, at first when I first started looking at it, I was kind of impartial. I didn't really know which way to lean. Uda's obviously very good at Muay Thai. He's very good at initiating the clinch, as we saw in his last fight against Collier. Broke his nose, just initiating the clinch from, lightning fast, just coming in and kneeing him in the face. The thing that got me to lean towards Vittori, which will be my official pick, is that not only is he getting better every fight, he's so young, he's 22, but I also read that he has been training at King's MMA for this fight, which that's the area that, two things. One, it's the area that Uda is specialized in, is Muay Thai, and two, it's the area that Vittori needs to improve on the most. So I think all signs for me point towards Vittori. And that brings us to our second bout on Fight Pass. It will be in the welterweight division. 9-1 Colby Covington, who is 4-1 in the UFC, coming off a dominant performance over Jonathan Munier up in Ottawa at UFC Fight Night Ottawa, a fight that you were at, Johnny. And he'll be taking on UFC newcomer Max Griffin, who's 12-2. He's the West Coast Fighting Championships welterweight champion, a guy that was on season 16 of Tough. He fought to get into the house against Matt Secor, a guy that will also be joining us later on in the show. We have a great interview coming up with him. But yeah, this should be a solid bout. And who are you taking in this one?
I'm calling the upset. Max Griffin, he's if you listen to the interview, he's pumped up. He's not a fan of Colby Covington's style. Colby Covington is really good, but I'm pulling Max Griffin. He's going to break the curse. On the Knee Bar podcast, we were 0-3. The MMA Kings podcast, new name, or breaking the streak. Max Griffin's going to win on Saturday night. But Colby Covington's tough, guys. He's underrated. I know he's got a lot of hype, but still, I think he's a little underrated. I think he's probably top 20, honestly. I don't know if he's actually rated that, but I'm thinking our boy Max Griffin, he's going to go in there and finish him. I just had that feeling since the fight's been announced. Nolan, I got to hear your opinion on this one.
Everybody's going to think we're really biased because he's on later on the show, but I'm going to go with that as well. I think that Covington, I feel like he's kind of hit a ceiling, in my opinion. He was progressing, he was getting better, and I feel like he just kind of he's been coasting a lot recently. You look at his last fight against Jonathan Munier, who took the fight on short notice, debut. Covington was a heavy favorite, and in my opinion, he wasn't that impressive. He had this, his usual grinding style up against the cage, but watching some tape on Max Griffin, he fought David Mitchell, who doesn't necessarily have the wrestling credentials that Covington has, but he does have the better grappling than Colby, and Griffin did an excellent job of keeping him away. Really never gave him a shot. He's got heavy hands, so I'm going to say that going. My official prediction, I think it could really go either way. It's a lot closer than the odd show, but I'm going to lean with Max as well. Which brings us into another welterweight bout, which is excellent. The Fight Pass headliner, Neil Magny versus Lorenz Larkin. Magny's 18-4, Larkin's 17-5. They're both coming off wins. Magny against Hector Lombard, Larkin against Jorge Masvidal. This is a great fight, in my opinion. The odds have it razor thin. And I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this one.
I'm going Neil Magny. I think this is great matchmaking. Both these guys are very good. Lorenz Larkin, I think, he's got a lot of potential still. I know he's been around for a while in Strikeforce and everything, but he's a guy that he's going to shock some people. But I think Magny's just a little more well-rounded in every facet of the game. I think he's going to be able to control them and kind of just do what he wants to. Magny, he was a guy, if you look at his first fight in the UFC till now, it's like he's evolved. He's definitely doesn't even in the he's almost like a totally different fighter. So I think Magny's gonna win this one. And just think, man, Magny could be fighting for that middleweight title. I mean, he beat Hector Lombard last. I'm just saying, man.
Yeah, I mean, he's been an ultra impressive guy. In my opinion, I was never huge on him, but he just kept proving me wrong over and over again, and I couldn't help but join the team. I've picked him in his last 3 fights, and he's won them all, so I'm going to have to pick him again here. I think Lorenz, this is definitely a good step up for him. He's finally, getting on a bit of a roll. He obviously the move down to welterweight was a great choice. but I'm going to lean towards Magny. I just think he's the better overall fighter. I think he's also a better wrestler than Larkin, and I think that's an asset or a part of the game that Larkin has always kind of struggled with. And the other thing you got to think of is length. Magny's got a significant reach advantage on him. So I just think Magny's on too much of a roll right now to stop. But it's a good fight. I'm leading Magny. And that's it for the Fight Pass prelims. And it brings us right into the FS1 prelims, which will be at 8 o'clock on FS1, obviously. The first fight that we have is Randa Marcos, 6-3, against Courtney Casey, 5-3. This fight, it's an important disclaimer. These girls have only had 3 weeks' notice for this fight. I'm not sure how much of a difference that will make. I'm going to lean towards Randa Marcos. I just think she's the better overall fighter. She looked good in her last fight against Jocelyn Jones-Lybarger. Casey's been on a bit of a downswing since her debut win against against Joe. Wait, fuck, I fucked up again, dude.
It's okay, dude.
I'm trying to do too many things at once. She didn't win that fight, right?
No.
She lost. Fuck.
Yeah.
I swear, women's MMA. All right. Give me a second. Regroup here.
I get that out of the way anyway.
Yeah, I was trying to, when we just came back, I had the biggest burp that I needed to do, and I had to hold it in. That was difficult. Now I know how much of a warrior Ariel Helwani is. Okay, 3, 2, 1. And that brings us into our next bout, which is the first one on FS1. It's on at 8 o'clock. It's in the women's strawweight division. Randa Marcos, who is 6-3 in the UFC, against Courtney Casey, who is 5-3 in the UFC. This is an important thing to note about this fight is that they only have had 3 weeks' notice for this bout. It was added very late to the UFC 202 lineup. I'm going to lean towards Randa Marcos. I thought she looked very impressive in her last fight against Jocelyn Jones-Lybarger. Casey's always game, obviously. She had her first UFC win back in July in South Dakota. She won by TKO. It was a very dominant fight against Christiana Stanciu. I'm just going to lean towards Marcos slightly. I'm not uber confident in this pick. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
I'm actually going Courtney Casey. She had her first UFC win just a couple weeks ago. Randa Marcos is always tough, too. She looked really impressive in Ottawa. I was at that fight. And I think this is a pretty good matchmaking, especially on short notice for a division that's not full of fighters. There's not a ton of fighters in the 115-pound weight class. So I'm going Casey. It can go either way, though. I think it is interesting, though, short notice. And both these girls have fought in the last 2 months. Come fight time, it'll be about 2 months for Marcos and just a couple weeks for Casey. So it's interesting that they're getting back in the octagon so soon.
Okay, Mr. Upset, Johnny Brown, going with another one. Let's see if the trend continues. The next fight is one that definitely has a backstory. It's got a storyline. I'm surprised, honestly, that they didn't have it either headline Fight Pass or headline the FS1 prelims, try to get people pumped for the main event. We have Artem Lobov, 11-12-1, obviously the training partner of Conor McGregor. He's 0-2 in the UFC. He'll be fighting the debuting Chris Avila, the teammate of Nate and Nick Diaz, who is 5-2 in his MMA career. He has never had a UFC fight. This is his debut. This is a fight that I watched a lot of tape on. I have an idea of who I'm going with. A lot of people think it's a very close fight, and I'm not uber confident. I'll get to my pick, but I want to hear yours first.
I'm actually going Lobov. I think Avila is a tough guy. He's got potential. He's just 5-2 though. I think it's a little bit early for him to be in the UFC. Lobov obviously is 0-2 in the UFC, and he's 11-12 record. So I'm not 100% sold on his credentials either. But his striking is pretty well rounded. I mean, it is a pretty solid asset for him. I think he'll take this one, but I'm not super confident. But I just feel like Avila is being rushed just a little bit. But man, he could make me eat my words. You never know.
Yeah, and then, you nailed it right on the head. That's the word that I would use when I describe Chris Avila would be rushed. I think that he's a prospect, but he really, in my opinion, doesn't deserve to be anywhere near the UFC right now. I understand why they did it. Apparently, it was part of Nate's bout agreement to fight at UFC 202 in the main event. He wanted Avila to be signed again to fight Lobov. So in that regard, it is good matchmaking. I think Lobov, in my opinion, is another guy. I think that I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I don't think that he should be in the UFC either. He's competitive to these guys, but other than his bombs and his striking that he has in the first half of the first round, that is very dangerous. If you get hit with one of those shots, you're going down. But besides that, he doesn't really have a whole lot to his game. With that being said, I am going to go with him just because of two things. One is experience, and the other one is that he does have better striking than Chris Avila. Avila, I think, is a ground-based fighter. It was kind of hard to tell. He had a lot of kind of a rough around the edges fighter in all assets of the game from the tape that I was able to watch. But for an even line, in my opinion, this would be a good fight to bet on. I would definitely bet on Artem Lobov. I just think he's better all around. But anyway, moving on to the next bout on UFC 202 on the FS1 prelims, Raquel Pennington 7-5-0, taking on Elizabeth Phillips 5-3. This was a little bit of a surprising matchup, I think, to most people. Pennington's a fighter who is ranked, and she always comes more improved from her last fight. She's somebody that you can never count out. At any point in the fight, she's always pushing. She's always going for it. She's on a 2-fight win streak against two very tough opponents, including one title contender in Betch Correia. I'm going to lean towards Raquel Pennington. Elizabeth Phillips, on the other hand, is coming off of her first UFC win against Jessamine Duke, which, you can say what you want, but Duke was not the best women's bantamweight in the UFC. She wasn't even close. So, it's just, for me, it was kind of a mismatch, this whole fight, and I can't go against Raquel Pennington.
Yeah, I had to agree 100%. Pennington, I think she takes this one via maybe submission. I don't know. Elizabeth Phillips is tough. She trains with Juliana Pena, so she's getting some good rounds in there with top competition in that weight class. But still, she just, I don't know. I don't believe, like you said, it was just her first win, and it was over a year ago. It was in July of 2015. I just don't believe that she deserves this fight. I think maybe it was just a fight to keep Pennington busy. But you never know in this sport. But yeah, I'm definitely rolling Pennington. I think she's the more well-rounded fighter and just overall, tougher out for sure.
Can't disagree there. And now we start getting into the really fun, not only fun but really high-level fights on this card. This card is obviously stacked from top to bottom, but the FS1 headliner should have been on the pay-per-view, in my opinion. It's an excellent fight. Top prospect I don't even know if you call him a prospect anymore. I think he's more than that. He's proven himself. Top, title contender. Cody Garbrandt, 9-0 in the UFC. 9-0 overall. 4-0 in the UFC. Will be taking on a very tough Takeya Mizugaki, who's 21-9-2. He's a UFC vet that's been around for a long time. Very durable guy. I think he's only been knocked out once in his career, and it was by the current champion, Dominic Cruz. In my opinion, man, I'm going to lean with Garbrandt, but I have to tell you, I think Mizugaki is a very tough test for Garbrandt, and it's a guy that he can't take lightly, just because before Garbrandt's last fight against Thomas Almeida, in my opinion, he wasn't that impressive to me. Like, he obviously came in, he was 3-0, so he's somewhat impressive, but it wasn't like he was going out and fighting the top level competition and dominating them, or like, even moderate level competition. He was fighting a lot of debuting fighters, or Marcus Brimage, he got cut right after that fight. So in my opinion, I'm leaning Garbrandt, but Mizugaki brings a lot to the table as well.
Mizugaki is my pick. The upsets continue. Garbrandt looked really impressive against Almeida, but Almeida played right into his hands, was super aggressive, and just got caught with some of those big punches and whatnot. I think Garbrandt is super impressive. I think Mizugaki, though, is I think he's at 32 fight veteran. Mizugaki, he's seen it all. This is what I say: if he can survive the some striking exchanges and get the fight into his realm, and maybe I don't know. Garbrandt's pretty good wrestling too. I don't know. It's gonna be I think it's a pretty evenly matched fight though. I either got Garbrandt by finish, or I think Mizugaki will take a decision. But you know what? I'm going to leave Mizugaki because I'm feeling like it's going to be a night of the upsets, and I'm going with Mizugaki.
Hey, man, if you're feeling lucky, you should throw some money down because, I'm sure you can make some good money if all your picks come true there. But, yeah, I agree with you there. I think that we talked about this. I'm not sure if it was on the Nibar podcast before we went on a little hiatus, but we had talked about personally that Almeida kind of played right into Garbrandt's style. Almeida had some chin issues in the past. He hadn't really fought guys that had great boxing abilities up until that point. He had his UFC debut. He fought, why am I blanking? Who did he fight, Johnny?
Tim Gorman, and he got pretty rocked. He
got rocked a lot. So not taking anything away from Garbrandt. Nobody else could do that to Almeida up until this point. But I think that we have to. This next fight will be his toughest test. I just think that like you said, Mizugaki is a tough style matchup for him. And I'm just going to lean slightly by Cody. I'll say second round TKO. That brings us right into our main card. Starting off the night, we have the return of Tim, the Dirty Bird Means, 25-7-1. He's coming off of an 8-month hiatus. Obviously, he had some issues with USADA. He won his appeal. He's back now. He had fought John Howard in December. He won by knockout in the second round. Now he's coming back. He's fighting Sabah Homasi, 25-7-1, who was making his, 11-5, who's making his debut on short notice. He had fought a couple weekends ago in Titan. He won second round knockout. He's replacing Sean Strickland, who was injured. I think that Tim Means is going to win this fight. I just think that, for anybody, Tim Means would be a tough matchup. Never mind a guy who's taking a fight on short notice, his UFC debut. I just think Means is striking. His pressure will be enough to, topple Homasi's power and his athleticism. So that's just my opinion, Johnny. I don't know if you agree or if you're going with another upset.
I am not going with another upset. Tim Means is going to bring the violence on Saturday night. Homasi's a tough guy. Don't get me wrong. I'm not counting him out in this fight. Never count anyone out in this sport. But Tim Means, like you said, the pressure, the striking he has, he is a dirty, and I don't mean that in a bad way. He's just a dirty, gritty, violent fighter, and I think he's going to bring it and be a little bit too much for Homasi. I'm interested, though. I think Homasi does have some skill. I'm anxious to see if he wins this fight. It's obviously going to shoot him up in the rankings. Even with a loss, though, I'm interested to see what happens with him. He's on that season, The Ultimate Fighter, and he's a pretty tough guy. But I'm rolling with Tim Means. He's going to get it done Saturday night.
Yeah, man, I got to agree with you there, and that's a good word to use, dirty, and I guess that's why they call him the Dirty Bird. But moving on to the second fight, in the welterweight division, we have the return of a very destructive fighter out of Korea, Hyun-Gai Lim, also known as the Ace. He will be taking on another debuting fighter, Mike Platinum Perry. Lim is 13-5-1. Perry is 7-0. I have to say first off that before I get to my pick, that I'm so glad that while the talent, these guys might not be the highest ranked fighters in the UFC, but I'm so glad that the UFC decided to put on such a violent main card. I love my friends who are kind of casual watchers have been getting into the sport more and more, and I think that come Saturday night with the violence that we're going to see, it will just even further their fandom. But that's beside the point. Hyun-Gai Lim versus Mike Perry. I'm going to go with Lim. I think that, again, I think he's a very underrated fighter. He's very destructive. His only losses in the UFC have come to ranked guys, top 10 guys, Tarek Safadine and Neil Magny. But other than that, he's had destructive knockout after destructive knockout. I don't think that the time off will be too much for him. He has not fought in over a year, 15 months actually, so that's quite the layoff, but I don't think that it will have too much of an impact. He's had long breaks in his career before with injuries and stuff, so not taking anything against Mike Perry. He's got dynamite in both hands if you've watched tape on him, but I just think Lim is a tough matchup for anybody.
Yeah, I'm going to actually have to go with Mike Perry. The upsets, I'm going with Mike Perry. He's going to be 8-0 come Saturday. Ace Lim, I'll be shocked if he makes 170, man. He's a huge guy for the weight class. I shouldn't say shocked, but if you remember a while back, he was in his UFC debut. He actually pulled off the card due to weight cutting issues. I hope we get to see this fight. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm kind of anxious to see with the IV ban and stuff. Let's see how it's going to work out. I think Mike Perry's a guy that a lot of people are underestimating. I have some friends in the Pensacola area, and they've known about it. They've been telling me him for a while. They've said Mike Perry's got to watch out for his knockouts. He has a good resume, man. He beat John Manley, who was in the UFC. Frank Carrillo, who's is a pretty good solid journeyman. He's 10-5. He also was supposed to fight Homasi. That fight actually did not happen. That was supposed to happen a little while back. So maybe with win or lose, maybe we see these guys matched up again. But yeah, I'm going with Mike Perry. I think Lim's going to come in there and have he has a reckless style. He's super tough. Don't get me wrong. nothing away from him. But he has that really reckless style, and I think Mike Perry's going to put him to sleep. And I think the night of the upsets continues.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how the MMA world works with Perry and like you just said, Perry and Homasi were supposed to fight each other, and now they're debuting on arguably the biggest card of the year. One fight after the other. So that's really interesting. I didn't know that. But moving along, now we even get into the even higher echelon of talent. We have Donald Cowboy Cerrone, 37-0, taking on Rick the Horror Story, who is 19-8. This is another great matchup. It's a really kind of like in my head, having watched these guys for so long, I'm really split on this one, man. I think that Cerrone has looked great since moving up to welterweight. I think that was definitely the right move. Not only has his chin improved, but I honestly think overall, like, his skills have really improved. I think that Pat Cote fight, the last fight, I actually had picked Cote. I was going to go with an upset there. But I just think that Cerrone really upped his striking ability. His kicks were on point more than we've ever seen. I thought he had head movement for the first time in a while. So that was really impressive to me. But he's fighting a really durable guy in Rick Story. Who's got one of the best chins, I think, in MMA, a really underrated chin. I don't know if you remember that fight against Thiago Alves, but that third round, Alves was winging punches at him, and he could not put Story away. And the other thing, another key to Story's game is body shots, and Cerrone historically has not had a good time with those. So while I'm really on the fence about this, I think that I'm going to lean with the upset. Rick Story, I think, is going to get it done. I think he's going to get it done. He's not going to get it done inside the distance. I think it's going to go to a 3-round decision, a really close, razor-thin fight. And I think on a night where there's a ton of great fights, that this one could potentially win fight of the night.
Yeah, welcome to the dark side. I'm picking Nick's Story as well. The upsets continue. I don't know. I mean, honestly, if I was making the odds, that's just about an even fight. I don't really pay attention too much to the odds myself. But Rick Story is a guy. You don't get me wrong, Cerrone's looked awesome, man. But I feel like Story has been in there with just about everyone at 170, and he's taken some of the best fighters in the weight class. He's lost some fights. Don't get me wrong. Against some of the guys, top guys. But he's been there. I feel like his grappling, as far as his wrestling, be a little bit better than Cerrone's. Cerrone's good on the mat. Don't get me wrong. I feel like Story will pull the upset. And I think you're right. I think it will go to a decision, a hard-fought decision, with Rick Story probably squeaking it out. But, man, I can't wait for this fight. This is, and like you said, you made some great points. I think this could be fight of the night for sure.
Yeah, man, you bring up some great points there. And speaking of great fights, light heavyweights, very destructive matchup between Anthony Rumble Johnson, who is 21-5-0, coming off a win against Ryan Bader. He's going to be taking on 25-4 Glover Teixeira, who's coming off of a win against Rashad Evans. Both of those fights ended in first-round knockouts for the competitors on UFC 202. This is another great fight, man. I might join your dark side again. I'm going to go with Glover, actually, and I'll tell you why. Anthony Rumble Johnson obviously has great striking. He's got that first-round intangible ability to just blitz people, knock them out, a lot of power. It's kind of a hard thing to stop. But I think if anybody is going to stop it, besides Daniel Cormier and John Jones, I think the guy to stop it would be Glover Teixeira. I think his head movement is very excellent. I think that his striking is very precise. He doesn't have a lot of wasted strikes, but he's got powerful strikes. And I think overall he's a more well-rounded fighter. I think if it goes to the ground, whether or not Rumble will be on top or the bottom, I think Glover will have some success, not necessarily like shooting submissions off his back, but I think if it gets to the ground, Glover will be able to do more than people would expect from him. I think that especially if he ends up on top, it will be a bad night for Rumble Johnson. I'm going to say Glover Teixeira weathers the early storm, and as the fight goes on, it goes more and more in his favor, and I think he's going to get a third-round submission.
I'm rolling with Anthony Johnson. I think he gets done early. You made some great points. Glover is extremely dangerous, and I could see this going Glover's way. I'm not 100% sold on Johnson, winning this fight, but I just have my vision, kind of a Bader scenario. But I don't know if you remember Glover Teixeira versus Ryan Bader a couple years ago. But I think this time Johnson will land flush, in this scenario and knock Glover out. I think Glover is tremendously talented. But I think this is Anthony Johnson's fight, and he gets that rematch with Cormier. Maybe that's what I'm thinking they'll do.
Yeah, man. I mean, I can definitely see that. Like you said, about the Cerrone Story fight. This is another fight that I think might be closer than the odds may say at the moment. But yeah, that's it for fights, right?
Oh wait, yeah. I think...
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, man. Can't go a podcast without talking about this one. Nate Diaz, 19-10-0 against Conor McGregor, 19-3-0, the rematch. I don't even have to tell you who they fought last. I think everybody knows that. It's a 170-pound main event. I cannot wait for this, and I'm going to let you go first. I'll let you go.
Man, I don't know who's the upset. Who's the underdog? I'll take them. No, just kidding. I think Nate Diaz wins this fight. Similar fashion. I think this fight goes a little bit longer into the third round. I think, deep in the third round, maybe. I think Diaz will eventually. I think McGregor, I mean, it's tough, man. McGregor is physically dominant at 145 because, he's got the reach. And even at 170, he's still got, pretty good size. But Diaz is just a guy that's been there, done that. I think he obviously exposed that Conor McGregor, I'm not going to say his takedown defense is bad, but he can get, Diaz capitalized on him trying to shoot, and if McGregor does it again, I think Diaz will capitalize, and I also just think Diaz will have more, you got to think he didn't have much time prepared for that fight last time. With the full training camp, you can also say that about Conor McGregor as well, but I think Nate Diaz gets it done late in the third round via submission. And then I don't know what you do with Conor, man. I know they want to give him 145, but we'll see. And I'm anxious to see your pick. I don't think you're that excited. I think you need to. I think you're kind of sleeping on this one, huh?
Oh yeah. This is probably the fight I'm looking forward to the least. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, man, I go back and forth about this one. I'm sure that my pick will change like 10 times between now and Saturday night. But I hate to say it, I'm gonna go with Conor McGregor. Like I said, I'll probably change my pick by fight night, but, man, I for some reason I have this feeling that that McGregor's going to come back. He's going to have, more controlled cardio. I think he's going to maybe not throw 1,000 punches in the first round. And I just think that he's definitely made some serious training improvements that he never had in his career before. He brought in some legitimate training partners, not to dump on SBG, but I do think that Nate had a good point bringing up his prior training partners. Man, I don't know though. The thing is, I could totally see Nate coming in, McGregor not being able to put him away and gassing again in the third round or the fourth round, even though he's supposedly improved his cardio, and especially if it hits the ground. I just don't see Nate not putting it away with what we've seen from McGregor in the Mendez and in the last Diaz fight. So right now I'm leaning slightly towards McGregor. I'm going to say he gets a second round knockout, and he'll make me miserable for another 3 months.
Either way, I know regardless of how the fight is, we're probably going to hear about it like we did the last one, which was crazy. It pretty much blew up Twitter. I think Twitter was offline for several hours after that. But yeah, I can't wait for this fight. These fights on Saturday night, like you said, the main card delivers premier violence. The FS1 prelims and the Facebook prelims have some really good fights on them that we just went over. So I think all in all, this is a pretty good event. Like you said, it's hard to judge these cards before the fights because sometimes like UFC 201, a lot of people were trashing that one, and it was a really entertaining card, in my opinion. And I'm pumped, man. I know you're pumped. I can.
Yeah, dude, I'm amped. I can't wait. There's just certain cards that you come across in the schedule. Being a diehard fight fan like we are, we watch almost every event, if not every event. And there's just those certain ones that stick out to you that you get that special feeling about, and there's no other sport that can do that to you. And this is one of those cards. It's going to be a big night. It's when in the world of sports everybody's looking at our sport for once, and I can't wait for it. Just looking over the next 3 months of cards, every single card is spectacular. This is a really great time to be an MMA fan. A lot of good stuff coming up, and I'm glad that we brought the podcast back for this stretch.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's a great time to be back. And you know what? We were honored to have a guest this week. He's fighting on the card. We talked about his fight. I picked him, Max Griffin. Let's sit down with him. Actually, we've already sat down with him, if you can't tell. And we already sat down with him, but we'll let you guys listen into what he said. Very interesting guy. And thank you guys for listening. And we'll be right back with you after the interview. Our first guest today will be making his UFC debut this Saturday night at UFC 202 in Las Vegas, Nevada. He'll be the second fight of the night, and he'll be facing off against Colby Covington live on UFC Fight Pass. He is none other than Max Payne Griffin. Max, thanks for joining us today. And how you doing?
I'm great. Awesome. Can't wait. How you guys doing?
Pretty good, man. Well, right off the bat, I have got to ask you, you're finishing up your training camp. The fight's 6 days away. how's camp been thus far as you're reaching the conclusion? UFC 202 right around the corner. How did it go, man?
Camp's perfect. I had 31 days. And the good thing is I was already in shape, already training. So we just worked a few things for him, stuff that's going to work on him. And healthy, happy, ready to rock and roll.
Well, that's great to hear. And I know fans are looking forward to your debut. UFC diehards may remember you from Tough 16. You fought Matt Secorn in an exhibition bout to try to get into the house. You brought him to a third round, but unfortunately got caught in a submission. What was the experience like, and how frustrating was it to get so close to achieving your goal but coming up, oh so short?
It was a bitter taste. I mean, it was a close fight. Even the judges thought, that it shouldn't have went to the third round. But I'm glad it did. I'm glad I lost because I learned so much. Back then, I was really only 3-1. Now I'm 12-2. Had about 10 title fights since. I fought a ton of great guys, and the timing couldn't be any better.
And that was my next question. A follow up to that. You're a guy that's been around since that experience. That was so early on in your career. What kept you motivated? Especially where you were getting 6 wins in a row and you still weren't getting the call that you were looking for. How does somebody stay motivated for something like that?
I don't know. I feel like it was my destiny almost. I feel like I needed to go through that to grow. And the fact that I was so close, my feet were on that mat. I was in front of Dana White. I was in front of those guys. And a lot of the big motivation was, too, is that they wanted me to be there. On Sub 16, when they did sign me up for that, there were 32 guys. They did 4 commercials. And the main one was on me, and it was the longest one. And they aired it the most. So they believed in me then. So that's motivation. If I was, good enough to get there then, they had some kind of interest in me. I just didn't make it the way it was supposed to be for them. So, but now I'm ready for me, and I'm ready to take over.
Right on, man. And like you said, that probably was, somewhat of a good thing. But before we get to what is next for you, I want to bring you back to January this year. You stepped in the cage with the first, and up until this point, I believe, is the only UFC veteran you faced off against, David Mitchell. You put on a clinic, knocking out the 6-fight UFC veteran in 43 seconds. When you got your hand raised, did you have a feeling that phone call that we just talked about was coming your way?
I was hoping. I mean, even since I was on Sub 16, Dana White said, hey, win a couple fights, you'll be back. I want to say I won about 10 fights since then. So, I was frustrated along the way. And even that night, even before the fight, we were told that fight had UFC implications. My managers were working with, Joe Silva and these guys saying, hey, beat this guy. They want you to beat this guy. Dana White was even supposed to be there on his show looking for a fight, but we heard he was in Alaska and got snowed in. He was talking to my promoter about going. He had his secretaries reaching out to come check out the fight, but it didn't materialize. So he wasn't there, but I did do the damn thing against David Mitchell, finished an excellent grappler, and tough guy. It was a good win. I thought I was going to go right after, the day, because, it couldn't be any better of a win. And it took a little bit of time, but now I'm here, ready to rock.
Yeah, well, obviously, we want to congratulate you on making the UFC. That's a big dream for most fighters out there. We hear some of these crazy stories about people getting the call. Where were you at when you got the call? Was there anything special about it, or how did it go down?
I was in the gym. I banged up my elbow pretty good, and it was bleeding. So I had to walk off the mat, damn. And once I grabbed my phone, looked at it, ton of activity, tons of text messages, missed calls, and what's going on here? And I read the text, and it said, this is Joe Silva from the UFC. What's your manager's phone number? I changed management recently, so gave him the number. He called me back screaming, we're in, after we're in. He sounded like a little girl on the phone. He was so excited. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, we're in 4 fights, baby. UFC Conor McGregor 202. He was excited, and I think I was in shock, really. I'm like, well, what does this mean? He's like, I'm telling you what this means. UFC, we're in. I'm like, what does this mean? And I finally, like, swallowed it and stoked. Showed my coach, showed my whole coach, Dave Marinoble, and blessing, man. Just a few seconds later, or he asked me, like, hey, do you want this fight or not? I was like, yeah, I want this fight. I don't care if I'm fighting Godzilla. He called back, and we got it going. Signed, got papers, and just get it. You know, dream come true.
And that's awesome, man. I can't even imagine that feeling, must feel like that. I bet that's just awesome. And it's quite an accomplishment, but they gave you a really tough guy, a tough veteran, Colby Covington. What are your thoughts on, you said you take on Godzilla, but what are your thoughts on taking on such a highly touted guy like that in your first fight?
He's good, but he's a wrestler. He's all wrestling. Everything else, I mean, he's great. Don't get me wrong. He's a great All-American, great guy. But they had me fight him for a reason. They actually had me fight him. It wasn't a short notice thing. It wasn't an injury. They put the card together, and I've been fighting these grappler kind of higher level wrestlers my whole career. So, I mean, I train with high level wrestlers. It's nothing new. And I'm take them out. I think it's a good way to get in. I think it's a great way to get in. It's like jumping off a diving board. They're going to throw me in with the sharks, and I'm a shark too. So I'm looking forward to good guys. I've always fought the best guys. I've never fought a tomato can. I've always fought the best, the cream of the crop, and that experience is what separates me, and it's gonna show.
Now, I follow both of you guys on Twitter, and about a week and a half ago, I noticed Covington started coming out with some tweets that kind of implied that he may be underestimating you, saying things about City League titles mean nothing in the UFC, and I was just wondering what your thoughts are on his trash talk. Is that something you like, or you just kind of brush it off and kind of laugh?
I like knocking guys out that trash talk. If you look at the resume, the guys that talk the most trash got it the worst. And this last fight with David Mitchell that I fought the UFC vet, he was talking the most trash ever. How he's just going to steamroll me, and he underestimated me. He's a grappler, and I'm nobody, and he's this and that. But you see what happened to him. I think I'm going to do my thing. I said a few things back, but at the end of the day, if I got nothing to say, I talk with my hands. And he's just going to be looking real stupid after I knock him out.
And that's a great,
I'll talk shit after I beat him.
That's a great way to put it, man. And what a stage for you to debut on Saturday, UFC 202, which is arguably the biggest card of the year, especially after UFC 200 fell flat a little bit. What are your thoughts on being on such a big card, being thrown in like, it's not like you're fighting up in, Western Canada or something.
Yeah, Kansas on a Wednesday or something.
Right. This is a big show.
Time. This is like fighting on the Super Bowl.
Right. You got Lorenz Larkin and Neil Magny following your fight. What are your thoughts on this? Does that just make you even more excited?
It's huge. I mean, I've been wanting to do this my whole life since I was 4 years old. So now to be here and to hop in on the big stage, just get thrown in there like this is an honor. And they put me against him for a reason. He's a boring fighter. He is. That's why, he's going to get beat up by me on Fight Pass. So, can't wait. I really can't wait. The stage is set. It's like a dinner table. I mean, the tablecloth's there. The plates are there. It's perfect. It's ready. It's going to be at a better time.
Yeah, and we can't really talk about UFC 202 without getting your opinion, your prediction on Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 2. Who are you taking, and how do you think the fight will play out?
I think it's kind of going to go the same way as last time. I think Nate's going to be better. I think Conor's going to be better too, but he came off the yacht with a shot like 4 days before the fight and beat him. And I know McGregor's arguably one of the best ever, but I got to go with Nate. He's from California. He trains like 2 hours away. So I'm about to go with him.
Have you ever had the opportunity?
Probably the same thing.
Have you ever had the opportunity to train with Nate at all?
No, they're down the road. They're cool guys, but I've never really been down there. we almost did. Me and Nick almost linked up a few times, but it just never materialized.
Gotcha.
But
Anyway,
we'll
we have a couple questions from Twitter users. We tweeted that we were going to have you on the show, and we got a couple of questions that got, some Twitter users wanted to ask you. Our friend Daniel Levy from Half the Battle asked you, how do you plan on dealing with Colby's relentless chain of takedowns that we've seen in the past? I'm assuming this is something you've been working on?
Yeah, everyone, if you watch the fights, everyone's kind of on the defense. Everyone. And if he knows all this stuff, his punches are just bullshit punches, two goes to the takedown, so he's very predictable. That's part of the plan. He's real predictable. I wrestle with these guys from Iowa, and he's all Americans. So it's nothing new. I mean, to me, it's not. To everyone else, I'm a new guy on the block. Colby's just humping these guys all day. Doesn't really go for the win. I mean, doesn't go for the finish. He's just a decision kind of hump kind of guy, boring guy. But he's not going to get a hold of me. My footwork's too good, and, I might take him down. Everyone's so scared of his relentless stuff, but he never gets hit. And that changes stuff.
We have another Twitter user, Alex Bricard, who wanted to know, what are your hobbies and interests when you're not fighting?
I like hanging out. I like playing with my son. I have a 5-year-old, and it's a blessing. I like being a kid. I like playing games, playing outside. A lot of stuff with him. I like the water. I like going to the beach. I live in California, so we go to the beach. We go to the snow. In Sacramento, we're 2 hours away from everything. So I like being outside, relaxing.
Who doesn't, man, especially with this great weather we've been having. But our last question, August 20th, T-Mobile Arena, you, Colby Covington, what is your official prediction for the fight?
Knockout. I'm knocking him out. Either TKO or knockout, but they're going to have to save him. And if he gives me his neck like he gives everyone else, I'm going to choke him out. And that's
you heard it here first. And, Max, we just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we let you go, we'd like to give you the opportunity to give any shout-outs that you want. Maybe tell some fans where to find you on social media. Anything you want to say, man, the floor is yours.
I want to say thank you guys for following me. It's been a long road. I've been doing this since I was a little kid, 4 years old. I want to thank all my fans, like my Sacramento fans. You guys have been rocking with me since the amateur days. Long career. I can't wait to go off, and we all can't wait to show my talents and what we all know we can do. Friends, family, my son, my girl, my haters too, man. I need you guys. The more views possible. You can find me on social media. You can find my website, www.maxpaynemma.com. Check me out there. And then it's Max Payne MMA on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. So add me. I want to thank you guys for having me on the show, and hope get me back on after I knock this guy out.
That's for sure, man. We'll definitely have you back on. We look forward to Saturday night and following you throughout the rest of your career, my friend. I think you'll have a great stint in the UFC. But again, thank you.
No, thank you guys as well.
There he is, Max Griffin. He takes on Colby Covington at UFC 202 this Saturday night in Las Vegas, Nevada, at the brand new T-Mobile Arena. The fight will air about 7 in the East, 4 in the West on UFC Fight Pass. Check it out. It's going to be a good one. And there you had it, Max Griffin. Wow, what an interview, Nolan. That's a great interview to get the show kicked back.
Yeah, not too bad. We had him come in on short notice for this interview. Which turned out great, and I can't wait for what we have in store for you guys. I just want to give a quick shout out to some of the other podcasts that I've been listening to. I think it's really important to give these guys listens. I think that the fight fan, the guys that do podcasts that are more of a fan of the sport, can do give you a good insight. We always listen to Ariel Helwani, and we always listen to a lot of the other big name journalists. But 2 podcasts that I've been enjoying. One, Daniel Levy's Half the Battle. I think that's a great podcast. If you guys are diehard fans, he goes very in depth with some fighters that you don't get to hear from a whole lot, and I think that it definitely has made me more of a fan of those certain guys, and I think it's definitely got me to know more of them. And then the other one I know is a very popular polarizing Twitter user, Fury's Fight Picks. He has a very good podcast. If you want to listen, maybe you don't agree with him on everything, but at least the guy does his homework. He watches the fights, and he gives you really in-depth breakdowns. So I want to thank those two for those two podcasts for getting me by in the meantime since we've gone on break. And also, I just want to say to all the people listening on the MMA Kings podcast, thank you, everybody that follows us. I really appreciate it. And just so you guys know, we will be making sure that we have more and more guests every week. We had one guest on this episode. It's the first episode back. Next episode, we're heading towards 3 maybe, and try to keep that pacing up for each podcast that we come out with. So thank you. One other thing. Starting next week, I believe, or the next podcast that we have, I think I'm going to start throwing in some contests for some signed items from different UFC fighters. You guys can enter somehow. And then we'll obviously always open up the fan questions, as you heard from the interview with Max Griffin. A couple fans got to ask questions. So a lot of fun stuff, and thank you guys for following us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. So signing off for this episode, I'm Johnny Brown alongside Nolan King. Thank you guys for listening. Check us out on Twitter. And that's it. See you next time.
Peace.